No one would follow an incompetent leader across the street if he said gold was on the other side. But most would follow a strong leader straight into hell if he deemed it necessary for mission success. What's going on, you guys? Today, we will be talking about why leaders, bosses, and supervisors should suck less, do better, do more, get their hands dirty. Yeah, that's the one we're gonna go with. Why leaders should get their hands dirty. Now, before we dive into this, let's first define what it means to be a leader. For those of you who don't know, my name is Nick. I'm a United States Army engineer officer, so I tend to view leadership from the military's perspective. I also have leadership experience as a former pipeline engineer and project manager, but today we'll focus on leadership from the viewpoint of the military. I tell you this to provide context in that I have used these lessons on both the military and civilian side of the house. Now, with that out of the way, let's dive into the question of what it means to be a leader. The Army defines a leader as anyone who, by virtue of assumed role or assigned responsibility, inspires and influences people to accomplish organizational goals. Army leaders motivate people both inside and outside of the chain of command to pursue actions, focus thinking, shape decisions for the greater good or the organization. All right, now step number 2, one up, one down. In one of my favorite military movies of all time, We Were Soldiers, Hal Moore is portrayed by Mel Gibson and delivers one of my favorite lines from the movie. "You learn the job of the man above you, and you teach your job to the man below you in rank. We'll be landing under fire, gentlemen. Men will die." Man, this line was so powerful because he knew that the mission that they were tasked with completing meant death was certain for many of the men who stepped off that bird into enemy territory. And by assuring that his leaders at all levels taught their jobs one level down and learned one level up, he ensured that the mission would have enough tactical redundancy to be seen through to completion. Admittedly, this is an extreme example for most of us. All politics aside, I don't see most of us needing to apply these teachings for fear of death under a hail of gunfire. No, what I'm saying is that we have all met someone who is hesitant to teach you something that they know. They are afraid that their self-worth within an organization is purely defined by that one thing that they're good at. They feel as if their jobs are safe if they are the only one who can do that one thing to perfection. Now, here is the very, very, very flawed thinking in that. First of all, sometimes we don't need a task to be complete to perfection. Sometimes 90% of perfection is good enough. And when your supervisors realize this fact, those hoarders of information are generally the first ones to go when it comes time to trim the fat and start laying people off in an organization. But more importantly than that, this is flawed thinking because hoarding information does not benefit the organization. Remember what step 1 says. A leader must be able to identify the bottom line in an organization and figure out how they fit within it. If you feel the need to plant your feet and be the sole hoarder of knowledge, you are not helping the needle to move forward. You are becoming a friction point within the machine. It is a benefit to teach others your job for several reasons, but for the purposes of this video, we will fixate on just 2: tactical redundancies and learn by teaching. Give me a drink of water. Y'all got me fired up today. Sponsored by Tap Water. So, tactical redundancies. A machine works best when it is well maintained and well lubricated, when everyone knows their jobs and everyone is present to execute said jobs. But what happens when someone doesn't show up to work, or they quit, or they get promoted? What's your backup plan? Sure, the machine may be able to move forward, but without a full staff, the cogs get bound up and friction points develop. As a result, that well-oiled machine has turned into that rusty project car sitting in your backyard that you swear you're eventually going to get around to. Now, contrary to popular belief, our employers aren't as stupid as many of us would like to believe. They recognize a team player when they see one. Take the time to teach your job to someone beneath you and do your best to learn the job of someone above you. They're going to take notice. Now, that said, at this point you might be wondering, what if that person above you is giving you that friction? They won't allow you to learn from them. Well, move on to someone else. Maybe that person is your shift supervisor and they won't teach you more about what it is that they do. Okay, that's fine. What about the person, the guy or gal sitting next to you? What can you learn from them? You'd be surprised how many people are willing to show you more about what it is that they do. It makes them feel like what they're doing has value. Most people are actually eager to show and teach what it is that they do so long as you're willing to take a chance and ask. At the end of the day, having more people who know how to do a job is only a benefit to an employer and thus great for the organization as a whole. If someone misses a shift, that's fine. We have someone else who's been trained just enough to be able to cover down and keep the machine moving forward. Or here's another example. Say that you have to have a meeting with your boss to discuss options moving forward. Well, great. Because of the training you've been participating in, one level up and down, you are now better equipped to be an active participant and contributor to the conversation. You see how everything comes full circle? Teaching someone else your job is not a liability. Now, that said, your aim isn't to be the best at your job per se, because ultimately that only digs you deeper into the mind of your superiors that you're the only one suited for that one thing. In turn, it makes you harder to replace within the organization. Why would they promote you if you're the only person in your job capable of doing your current job? They need you and can't replace you. But if you teach your job to someone else, then you're free to hopefully move around and move up within the organization. All right, let's run down some other ways that you can learn. There are many styles of learning, and some of the most common ones that you may have heard include visual, auditory, kinesthetic, I believe I'm saying that correctly, reading, and writing style learners, to just name a few. Now, if you're unfamiliar with these styles, let's just run down them real quick. So, visual learners prefer visual aids such as whiteboards, pictures, and videos, to just name a few. Auditory learners tend to absorb information, through sound, right? This type of learner might prefer to listen to an audiobook rather than watching someone diagram it out on a whiteboard, for example. Kinesthetic learners is the camp where I tend to fall into. People like me, I prefer to get hands-on. I gain much more knowledge by doing things. It doesn't matter if I fail at doing the things, because I still learn something regardless. And then finally, you have your read-write learners. If you find yourself enjoying the process of journaling, writing essays, and reading books, you probably fall into this category. Now, what does this have to do with the method of learn by teaching? Well, it's because this is a method of learning that is often overlooked by educational experts. I can honestly understand why, because this method is difficult to conduct in a time-constrained traditional educational system. This is because learn by teaching as well, when you learn by teaching. Okay, that wasn't real useful. Okay, all right. You ever heard the expression, the best way to learn something is to teach it to someone else? Well, that's where this method comes from and why it's so critical that you do this within your organization. You will never gain a better understanding of the skills that you have practiced than when you attempt to teach them to others. Putting yourself in a position where you have to teach someone else a skill or method that you developed, you quickly realize any shortcomings in your way of doing things. You'll quickly figure out that you may not be able to articulate the method or task as well as you once thought. So we've covered a lot in this section about learning and influencing one level up and down. But what you're really wanting to know is how to apply this in your life or your job. Well, unsurprisingly, this is about as simple as it sounds. All you have to do is teach someone below you and learn from someone above you. I really hate that a lot of this sounds so simplistic, as I feel as if I'm just repeating myself over and over again, but it really is that simple. Unfortunately, our modern society has led us to believe that our complex lives require complex solutions to the problems we face, and this is quite simply not the case. Often, the best solutions contain the fewest moving parts. The real key to this is while you're doing this, always keep step one in the back of your mind. Keep that bottom line up front as a key factor in your motives to teach down and learn from the top. Remember that the point of a leader is to keep the end goal of the organization first in our minds. Now that said, the process in which you will teach those below you is reflective of your understanding of how their job also fits into the big picture of the company. Conversely, while you're learning on the job, you will be able to pick up on the subtleties of upper management that even your supervisors may not understand. This is the power of having a process for most things. A process has the ability to inform and clarify each task by grounding everything towards a common goal. This will help quickly eliminate unnecessary variables in your life equation. Instead of having to weigh a dozen recommendations at once, you might only have to contend with 2 or 3. This is because if the other 9 variables don't align with the overall goals of the mission, project, or organization, then they get the axe immediately. No questions asked. Get rid of them and focus on the 2 or 3 that align with the bottom line. Demonstrating this ability will make you appear that you have some sort of supernatural ability to do mental gymnastics seemingly with ease, which will quickly set you apart from your peers, which in turn will propel you forward towards your desired position as a leader. So I agree that was a lengthy run-on sentence, but hey, we got more to cover, so let's get on with the third and final step of the leadership process and why you should aim to get your hands dirty more often. Step 3, develop a people-first mentality. Now to recap, we have learned that understanding the bottom line up front is the foundation to your success as a leader. We have also discussed how teaching one level down while learning one level up is the oil that freely allows the organization to move forward. Now that we have a foundation to build upon and the oil to slick up the operation, now it's time to give life to this engine in the form of fuel. Now, this is the part that most of you are going to dread, myself included. This section requires us to interact and attempt to understand the most complex fuel within any organization: people. Let's face it, in today's society, most people tend to suck. Most of us are lazy, self-centered, and feel like we deserve way more money for the work that we do. It's a losing battle working with people, but it's necessary. Okay, so anyway, this final section revolves around adopting a people-first mentality, which focuses heavily on the latter part of the definition of a leadership, which, if you recall, is leadership involves at least two people or groups, one which leads and another which follows. The influence process aims at getting results and developing the organization. Leaders must provide successful mission accomplishment with how they treat and care for organizational members. Taking care of people involves creating and sustaining a positive climate through open communications, trust, cohesion, and teamwork. I say again, leaders must balance successful mission accomplishment with how they treat and care for organizational members. Taking care of people involves creating and sustaining a positive climate through open communications, trust, cohesion, and teamwork. I do not understand why this is so hard for the vast majority of appointed leaders to understand. But without the people in your organization, guess what? You are dead in the water. I get it. I understand all too well the pressures that get put on leaders to get results. Quite often, those above us put far too much weight on this metrics of leadership than they should. Mission success is important. I'm not denying that. Completing a mission, task, project, or whatever can quite often be the difference between winning or losing, keeping a job, getting fired, or in extreme cases, life or death. I get it. But at the end of the day, finding balance between burnout and project completion falls squarely on the shoulders of those in charge. This section right here is what truly separates good leaders from great ones. Now, I won't lie. I have personally struggled with this in the past. As a platoon leader, I am guilty of pushing my guys past the point of failure, knowing full well that they couldn't go anymore. And as a civilian project manager, I have forced my CAD designers to work overtime to meet deadlines with the knowledge that my prior indecision is what put us behind in the first place. And as a company commander, I still feel the weight on my heart of putting my soldiers in harm's way because I didn't do my job and risk being behind schedule instead of putting safety first. And the result of my ineptitude left a soldier under my command with a permanent reminder on his hand when a 100-pound hatch fell in his hand and damn near severed his fingers off. The point is, I've learned a few things along the way and applied them for the better. But let's say for the sake of argument that you don't know where to start with all this. Maybe you're an introvert and simply lack the knowledge and experience necessary to stand up and speak out when you need your people to perform. What if you're the new guy to an organization and they don't know you from nobody? So where do you start with all this? Well, here's something that's worked for me for a few years now, and honestly, every time I've needed to use this tactic, it gets easier and more effective. So to start, what I like to do, both in my civilian and military life, is to break down each new encounter into the following categories: privates, sergeants, platoon sergeants, company commander, staff, and battalion executive officer, or XO. So this is how the military, or at least the United States Army, is generally broken down at the company level on up to the battalion level. The best example I can give for this is when I worked at Shell down in Houston, Texas as a contracting engineer and project manager. I was fresh from a deployment as a company commander in Kuwait, and I employed this strategy to great effect if I do say so myself. Now, the reason they hired me was because Shell needed project managers with engineering backgrounds to help get their plant construction projects complete. Funny enough, sidebar on this, when I did the phone interview for this job, I employed another strategy which I developed for interviews. It requires me to do something non-conventional and do my best to stand apart from everyone else. If you want, I'll go into this further in another video, but long story short, during the interview, I was asked if I had any experience in pumps or lubricants or plant design. Now, you would think I just lied to them over the phone, but I didn't do that. I wanted to stand out, so I told them no, but that my background was almost exclusively in natural gas, which has pretty much nothing to do with the job that they were interviewing me for. So when they asked me, well, why should we hire you? Well, my answer went something along the lines of, well, sir, you should hire me because you don't need another overeducated fluids engineer on your payroll. What you need is someone who can get stuff done. You have projects that are over budget and behind schedule, and you have a massive disconnect between your construction contractors and your full-time Shell employees, and you need someone like me who can decipher all of this chaos and get your projects done so you can get back to production. I am most certainly paraphrasing what I said over that phone interview, but I assure you I did not hold back when I told them I had none, precisely zero, technical knowledge about the position that they were interviewing me for. But my words clearly articulated to them that I was someone who was process driven and, at least on the surface level, appeared to be someone who could get the results that they were looking for. But I digress yet again, and we will save that story for another day. Now, back to my first week on the job. So I met my new boss, was assigned to a team, and met everyone I'd be working with until I either got fired from my contract or I quit. So yet again, let me stress that I will have an entire video going into detail of how I built a team around me at Shell, but the bottom line up front is that I identified who everyone was, categorized them into privates, sergeants, platoon sergeants, company commander, staff, and battalion executive officer, and then we went from there. In a nutshell, I viewed myself as the company commander. My job was to rally the platoon sergeants around me so that they could give marching orders to their sergeants and privates. Now, as for the staff, they did what they do best, which is to make every effort imaginable to derail my projects and to make things harder than they needed to be. This is where the platoon sergeants and XO come in handy. By building trust with just a handful of individuals, I was able to move these projects forward. Guys, I cannot stress how important it is for you to understand how powerful this last step really was for me. By adopting a people-first mentality, I was able to talk these key players and their lower-level subordinates to gain an intimate understanding of their frustrations. My job as a self-proclaimed commander was to listen to their concerns and then break down those barriers. Now let's outline some very real barriers that happened to me during my time at Shell. It was my job to address them and overcome them for my subordinates. The first one was one of my contractors was getting very annoyed because he wasn't getting paid on time. He was constantly being asked to do more and more upfront work and establish a project before it kicked off. Now, it could be weeks or months before the project start date and he wasn't getting paid for any of this work. And as a result, the contractor would have thousands of dollars and dozens of man hours tied up into a fictional project with no cash flow to show for it. So, what did I do? Well, I went to the staff and told them I needed them to free up some funds so that we can get this guy passed. And of course, because they're staff and they want to be difficult, they told me no, so I walked away. Now, undeterred, I went back to my office, crunched some numbers, and presented them to the XO. Now, these numbers that I've been crunching outline how much money we would ultimately lose by not freeing up what amounted to pennies so that we could get this contractor paid. It was an obvious scenario. We either pay this guy and recoup that money on the back end, or we don't pay him and the project stalls, which results in even more money down the drain due to lost production. So XO does what XO does, march down to the staff and force them to pay up. Problem solved within one day. Not only is everyone happy, but the contractor now has trust in me that I'm someone who is willing to listen to his concerns and solve his problems. Even though we had just met, I put his needs above everything else, and that is how you build trust, by putting people first. Another example, I had a different contractor who was tasked with sketching out a pipe routing method for a particularly cluttered section of the plant. He sent out his best pipe fitter to do a rough sketch, and after a day of sketching, the pipe fitter told me that he didn't see a way to route everything in the way I had originally envisioned. So here's the problem. Here's what most leaders would do. They would tell this oil-soaked, coverall-wearing, low-level pipe fitter to make it work and don't come back until it's done. But I am not most people or a conventional leader. I am a leader who believes in getting his hands dirty. I have never fit pipes a day in my life that wasn't on anything other than a clean office behind a computer screen. Maybe I should listen to this guy. In fact, here's a crazy idea. Maybe I should walk a mile in this guy's shoes so I can get a better understanding of where he's coming from. So that's what I did. I got a crash course on how to use a fall arresting system, donned the harness, and climbed about 2 stories worth of scaffolding into a spider web of pipes above the facility. Now we slithered and crawled our way across these pipes until we reached an area where these proposed changes were to happen. It turns out he was right. He proposed a new method of routing the pipes and we went with that. So even though my original design had to change in the end, that didn't matter. If his method worked better than mine and it still meets the desired outcome, then let's go with that. And furthermore, as a result, here's the important part, I was showing that I was capable of listening to the people who work for me. They are now more inclined to be more involved and they feel like they are actually contributing to the work being done, building trust. Instead of forcing them to do the job, they now take pride in what they do without me having to directly supervise. And that is the power of getting buy-in from your team. Put their needs first. Take a minute to listen every so often, and the result will be you create a strong working relationship. It's amazing how quickly you can build a relationship with someone if you're willing to spend a little quality time understanding things from their perspective. Now keep in mind, guys, I am not saying that you should always roll over and do what your team or employees say. But by building trust with them in this manner, you're going to find that when it comes time to put your foot down and ultimately say no to something, they are far less to fight back with you on the matter. The ship keeps moving forward and everyone stays on task. I could go on and on with examples like this, and maybe one day I'll do that in another video. Also, guys, I know I've said a lot in this video, but there's just too much going on in my head to just put it all in one video. I'm gonna have to break other topics up into other videos in the future. So if you're enjoying this video so far, consider giving it a like. And I promise, if you decide to subscribe to the channel, you're gonna be rewarded with additional videos like this, providing you with great actionable advice so that you can use them in your life and jobs. Now, back to your regularly scheduled programming. So the point is, I had no hope of being successful at my job without the ability to understand that people were my greatest asset. Great ideas can come from anyone. I may be the educated engineer assigned to these projects, but these guys live this daily, and a little time spent with them helped me to gain a better understanding of the projects I was working on, and most importantly, it helped me to build trust with them. You guys keep this in mind. No one would follow an incompetent leader across the street if he said gold was on the other side, but most would follow a strong leader straight into hell if he deemed it necessary for mission success. Let's bring all this together. Guys, there are probably millions of pages written on the topic of leadership, and it is truly unnecessary to make an attempt to digest even 1/10 of all of it. Everything outlined thus far in this video is not theoretical. I have applied every single one of these principles over the years, and so far, hasn't let me down. I'm always testing and tweaking my methods, but the foundation remains the same. And while I don't expect everyone to memorize the methods outlined here, at least if you take away nothing else, keep the following in mind. Leaders, you should always strive to get your hands dirty whenever possible. You will learn more about yourself and those you lead by walking a mile in their shoes than you will ever learn from a best-selling author. I appreciate y'all's time yet again. You could be watching anyone else right now, but you chose to spend it with me. Y'all take care. God bless.